take my word for it, you rely on testimony a lot. And I don't mean testimony like in a court, I just mean everyday stuff. People tell you things like, oh, it's 6:15, or the pub is on South Street, or oh, I saw a cool YouTube video today. Oh, did you? Oh, yeah, what was it about? People tell you stuff, and you believe it. So say I gave you directions to the pub. You'd probably believe me. But I might be lying or misremembering. When you accept my testimony, you trust that I have knowledge and that I am accurately imparting it. But on what grounds do you believe that? This is called the vulnerability problem. It's helpful to focus on ordinary testimony when we're talking about the vulnerability problem, rather than expert testimony in a court. Because if you hear expert testimony, then you have some independent reason to believe it, namely the fact that the person delivering it is an expert. Whereas if I just ordinarily give you directions to the pub, then you don't have any special reason to think that I'm telling you the truth. So is my testimony sufficient warrant for your belief? Is it rational for you to believe me? Some philosophers, called reductionists, say that it isn't. So if I tell you that the pub is on South Street, you need some other evidence that I am likely to be telling the truth. Like you know that I know my way around town and that I'm generally reliable with directions. Other philosophers, called anti-reductionists, say no, the testimony on its own is sufficient warrant. I would guess that most people, if you asked them, would be anti-reductionists most of the time. If you are on a jury, you might be expected to be a little bit more reductionist, but different scenarios need different standards of epistemic justification. In ordinary life, we usually just accept what we're told, and we don't check and wait for every single little bit of evidence because, hey, ain't nobody got time for that. And this has led some philosophers to defend an acceptance principle. Tyler Burge says this: a person is entitled to accept as true something that is presented as true and that is intelligible to him unless there are stronger reasons not to do so. So when I tell you that the pub is on South Street, the fact that you understand me is sufficient reason to believe it, unless you have some overriding reasons to suppose that I'm mistaken or lying. Why does Burge say that? Well, he says that the fact you understand me means that I am probably rational. I framed my answer to your question in a rational way that you, a rational being, can understand. And reason is usually a guide to truth. So the fact that you're hearing this testimony from a rational source means that you can believe that it is true. That doesn't guarantee that it is true, obviously, just that you have some reason to believe it. But one issue that I have with this is that you can rationally believe things that are false. If you believed that the world was flat, it would be rational to suppose that you could fall off the edge of it. Reason is a great guide to what follows from the premises you start with, not necessarily to truth. Tony Coady defends quite a different sort of acceptance principle, which is pretty interesting. He says, look, a presumption of truth is just built into the whole idea of testimony. It would be totally bizarre to find a society in which all testimony was false. I mean, it wouldn't even be testimony. Imagine if in this society sentences like the pub is on South Street and it's 5:15 were never used to say anything true, and nobody ever corrected their usage and said, it's not 5:15, the clocks went forward, it's 6:15. That wouldn't even be testimony. We can't make sense of sentences like that unless we presume that they are at least trying to assert some truth. Coady also points out that most of the evidence that we would have to rely on if we were reductionists would itself depend on testimony. So I tell you the pub is on South Street, and you're a reductionist, so you need some evidence that I'm likely to be telling the truth. So you stop some random passerby and you say, hey, is Ollie reliable with directions? Does he know his way around town? And they say, oh yeah, he's lived his whole life, he's an expert, exactly, he knows what he's doing, you're in safe hands there. Well, if you don't believe my testimony, on what grounds do you believe the testimony of that person that's supposed to be backing mine up? Now you might go and ask somebody else. You might say, does this random punter know who Ollie is? Does he give accurate reports about Ollie's sense of directions? But what's going to back up their testimony? It's just going to keep going and going and going. What Coady shows is that once you let it in, the vulnerability problem, very much like the xenomorph from Alien, is extremely difficult to get rid of. What do you guys think? Is testimony its own warrant? Is there some kind of rational acceptance principle? Recommended readings, as usual, are in the description, and for more philosophical videos every Friday, please subscribe. This episode was commissioned by the Open University. To find out more about philosophy, please visit the Open Learn website. Whoa! I think those sexy pills just kicked in, and I definitely wasn't just covering an awkward jump cut. Next time, we could either do Is the Law Like a Comic Book, or we could do Is Cinema Sins the Future of Film Criticism? They're both really, really cool scripts, and I'm looking forward to them. As well as the Open University, this episode was sponsored by Intimidating Scones, DJ MacIsaac, Rich Clarke, and a bunch of other people whose names are in the description. So thank you to everybody who sponsored the show on Patreon. And I've just added a bunch of new rewards to my Patreon patrons, so if you wanted to support the show, that would be a cool way of going about it. Also, we are now at 25,000 subscribers, which is a crazy number. In fact, by the time you watch this, it might actually be 26,000. So thank you to all of the people who watch the show. I never imagined it would get this big. And I want to do something to celebrate. So at 1 PM on Saturday the 25th of April, I'm going to be doing a Google Hangout for an hour or an hour and a bit. And I'll publicise links to it on Facebook and Twitter closer to the time. But if you want to ask me questions about the show, or me, or philosophy, or anything you want, or you just want to chill out and come and have a good time, then come along and hang out. We'll all have some cool chat and it'll be really fun, and we'll celebrate 25,000 subscribers. That's also the day directly after my birthday, so I might be a bit like, ugh, but it should be good fun. Hopefully I'll see you there. Anyway, last time we asked, should you obey the law? Franklin Stefano was quite impressed with my Scottish accent in the last episode. Well, thank you. I have actually lived in Scotland for some time, but if any of you out there are really Scottish, you'll know that my Scottish accent is actually a load of crap. Boris the Llama said that we shouldn't have to obey laws at all because we have liberty rights, but you also said that it's morally wrong to harm other people. So maybe one way of incorporating both of those things would be to say, well, people need to be free to do whatever they want, but we'll pass some laws to prevent them harming other people, and that way we've got the maximum of liberty, but with the minimum of harm. And funnily enough, that is exactly what John Stuart Mill argued for in part 4 of his essay on liberty, which I think you would really like, Boris the Llama, so I've included a free link to that bit of John Stuart Mill's writing in the description so you can find it and read it for free. Hope you enjoy. Clever Cypriot came up with a cool reply to David Hume. And if you remember, David Hume was the one who said that you couldn't just be obliged to obey the law because you are living peacefully in your country and thereby tacitly consenting to follow its rules. Because you can't really consent to following the rules if you don't have an alternative, if you can't really leave your country very easily. So Clever Cypriot said, alright then, what if we just made it easier to leave the country? What if we made it easier to opt out of obeying the law, which is quite a cool, interesting reply to Hume, actually. I'm not sure in practice it would be 100% feasible, but yeah, that's very good that you brought that up. That's quite interesting. Well done. Juan Torres is a lawyer and says that when they went to law school, they were taught that people are obliged to obey the law because we give some kind of consent to it, because we elect officials who set the law for us. And it's interesting that you were taught that, given all the problems with that view that we were talking about last time, and given that nowadays it's not actually a very popular view amongst philosophers. But of course, the function of law school is to train lawyers, not philosophers, so, you know, I'm not having a bash at your law school or anything, but it is just quite cool that that's what you were taught. I suppose that makes sense. I mean, my philosophy of law lecturer told me that when he used to teach law students, they used to be quite disinterested in the philosophical underpinnings of the law, because, I mean, if you're a lawyer, you need to know how to work the law, basically. Sam Burns said that maybe you could be obliged to obey the law as long as it brings some benefit to everybody. Well, remember that one of the key features of political obligations is that they are content independent. You're supposed to be obliged to obey the law because of the law's own authority. So if you're obeying it because it brings some benefit to people, then that's not quite the kind of reason we were talking about. Danger Eagle Official said that you could be obliged to obey only just laws, which is an interesting idea, but somebody who thought that you did have political obligations to obey the law could accommodate that, because remember, one of the other features of political obligations is that they are pro tanto. They apply as far as there are no overriding reasons, and since we usually think of morality as giving us quite strong reasons, it's likely that moral reasons would count amongst those that can override an obligation to obey the law. So what you've said there is a very illuminating point. It's not actually incompatible with the idea of having to obey the law out of a sense of duty towards its authority. Although what you've said does assume that there could be such thing as an unjust law, which some people would actually deny. Some people say that there could be no such thing as an unjust law. That doesn't make sense to speak about a law that's unjust. So that's starting to get into the issue of what exactly the law is, which is a very interesting topic we'll have to get into another time. That's all the time we've got this week. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!
Get more from the Open University. Check out the links on screen now.